When security dragged a black woman out of a bank, only to find out she owned the bank, 5 whispered words shattered careers, exposed systemic rot, and rewrote the rules overnight. Have you ever been so underestimated that your silence became your loudest statement? On a quiet Tuesday afternoon, a sharply dressed woman walked into a bank she helped build from the ground up. Minutes later, she was surrounded, dismissed, humiliated in front of a dozen strangers, and live-streamed to thousands more. But this wasn't just a mistake. This was a warning shot to an entire industry. Because what the manager didn't know was that the woman he tried to expel wasn't just a customer. She was Dr. Elise Monroe, founder, CEO, and 67% owner of Regency Capital Bank. And when she whispered 5 words into her phone, the fallout didn't stop at the lobby floor. It reached boardrooms, courtrooms, headlines, and the conscience of a nation. Tuesday, 2:47 p.m. The marble floors of Regency Capital Bank gleamed under the afternoon sun pouring in through the towering glass facade. Chandeliers above threw fractured light across polished counters. The atmosphere was hushed, clinical, corporate. And into that polished silence walked Dr. Elise Monroe. She wore a midnight navy blazer over a crisp white blouse, slacks tailored to perfection, and a pair of low-heeled pumps in soft Italian leather. Her skin, smooth and deep brown, glowed against the sharp elegance of her outfit. Around her neck, a subtle gold chain, real gold, not plated, barely caught the light. The only sound was the gentle click of her heels as she moved toward the center of the lobby with calm purpose. The receptionist didn't even look up. Behind the main desk, a man in his late 20s sat typing. That was Carson Blake, fresh out of business school, 3 months into his role as branch manager. He noticed her only peripherally, the way you might notice someone stepping out of a rideshare, nothing noteworthy. Certainly nothing requiring attention. To Carson, Elise was just another middle-aged black woman walking into a private banking institution without an appointment, without documentation, without entitlement. "Ma'am," he said, standing and straightening his tie like someone imitating authority. "This is a private financial institution. You can't just walk in off the street and start making demands." Elise stopped exactly 4 steps from his desk. Her expression didn't change. She didn't frown. She didn't scowl. She simply blinked once, registering the instant assumption he had made. "I haven't made a single demand," she replied coolly. Carson raised a brow. "Well, you're in the lobby, asking for what?" "Assistance. I'm here to conduct a routine business review," she said, her voice calm and precise. Nothing more. Carson gave a short, humorless laugh. "Right. And I'm supposed to believe you have a business account here." That was when Officer Darius Miles, the uniformed in-house security guard, stepped closer. He wasn't trying to intimidate, yet, but the tone in Carson's voice had set off silent alarms. Darius had been doing this for 15 years. He'd seen scam artists, confused retirees, entitled tech bros, and angry small business owners. But this woman? Something about her felt deliberate, like she wasn't here by accident. Still, Carson was his supervisor, and Carson's tone was escalating. "Let's not create a scene," Carson said loudly enough for nearby clients to hear. "We reserve the right to refuse service to anyone disrupting the environment. People like you need to understand there are boundaries." The room went quiet. A few clients shifted uncomfortably. A young woman seated near the waiting lounge slowly pulled out her phone and began recording. Her name was Renee Wallace, a community advocate and social media personality. Her live stream had 700 followers when she tapped Go Live. "Oh, you guys are going to want to see this," she whispered to her phone. "This man's about to lose his job in real time." Elise didn't move, didn't even flinch. "I've raised my voice to no one," she said. "But your attitude is confrontational," Carson shot back. "And if you don't have an account or paperwork, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." "I didn't say I didn't have an account," Elise replied. "I said I'm here for routine business." Assistant Manager Jillian Tran, a Vietnamese-American woman with sharp eyes and even sharper ambition, emerged from the hallway that led to executive offices. She'd heard the tail end of the conversation and paused to assess. Carson gestured toward Elise. She walked in off the street. "No appointment. No ID. Says she's here to review something, but hasn't provided any proof." Jillian looked at Elise, really looked. That blazer was designer. The bag? Real leather, not faux. Her posture radiated authority. The way she held her ground wasn't arrogance, it was precision. Still, Jillian hesitated. Carson outranked her. Is there a problem? Jillian asked neutrally. Before anyone could respond, Elise reached into her purse. Darius instinctively tensed. But what came out wasn't a weapon, wasn't even a document. It was a wallet, sleek and well-worn. From it, she pulled a gleaming black card, an American Express Centurion. Jillian caught the reflection and sucked in her breath. Carson, predictably, missed it entirely. I'm asking one more time, Carson said louder now, for the benefit of the growing audience. Leave, or I'll be forced to call actual law enforcement. Darius shifted on his feet. Sir, she hasn't. She's trespassing. Escort her out. From the corners of the lobby, phones were now pointed in multiple directions. For clients were openly recording. The bank's internal surveillance system documented every second in 4K clarity. Renee's live stream jumped from 700 to 2,800 viewers. She's not yelling, not disrupting anything, Renee murmured. And this guy's about to call the cops because, why exactly? I'm calling corporate, Carson muttered under his breath, reaching for his office phone. They'll handle this. You have 2 minutes, Elise said softly, glancing at the gold-rimmed watch on her wrist. Cartier, understated, yet unmistakably exclusive. 2 minutes for what? Carson scoffed. To summon your imaginary lawyer? Elise ignored him and opened her phone. The case bore her initials, EM. She scrolled through her contacts, found the name she wanted, and tapped. James, she said into the receiver. This is code 7. Regency Capital. Downtown branch. Immediate action required. She hung up without waiting for a reply. Carson rolled his eyes. Who exactly did you just call? Your hairdresser? Elise slipped her phone back into her purse. Someone who actually works here. The clock on the wall now read 2:58 p.m. Darius rubbed the back of his neck. His gut told him something was very wrong. Carson, meanwhile, was pacing behind the desk. You don't belong here, he said under his breath. Jillian frowned. Elise said nothing. The room held its breath. Suddenly, Jillian's tablet chimed. She glanced at the message and froze. Her mouth went dry. The message was marked urgent. It read, from James Calloway, Regional VP, subject, code 7 incoming. Do not escalate. She looked up at Elise, truly seeing her for the first time. Carson, she whispered. We may have made a mistake. What are you talking about? Carson snapped. But before Jillian could answer, the double doors to the bank flew open. A man in his 50s burst in, panting. His tie was loose, shirt untucked slightly. Sweat gleamed at his hairline. James Calloway was never seen out of sorts, but right now, he looked like he'd just run a marathon in a thunderstorm. Dr. Monroe, he called across the marble floor. My God, I'm so incredibly sorry. The name hit Carson like a punch in the gut. Dr. Monroe, he repeated, blinking. Jillian's hands trembled as she opened the corporate directory and searched. There it was. In bold, Dr. Elise Monroe, founder, CEO, chairwoman of the board. 67% majority shareholder, Regency Capital Bank. The woman they tried to kick out owned the damn bank. The air shifted. James crossed the floor in long strides. His voice lowered. Please, Dr. Monroe, allow me to formally apologize for this appalling treatment. Carson's face drained of all color. I didn't know. You didn't ask, Elise said calmly. You assumed I didn't belong. That truth landed like thunder. Renee's live stream passed 6,000 viewers. Phones buzzed across the room. Screenshots, videos, hashtags. Jillian stepped forward. Dr. Monroe, Elise turned to her. Her voice was professional, not unkind. You're not the problem here. But we will talk about your role later. Relief flickered in Jillian's eyes. Carson looked like he might faint. We have a board meeting in 2 minutes, Elise said. I suggest you attend. James opened his mouth to respond, but said nothing. Silence descended on the lobby. Then, slowly, definitively, Dr. Elise Monroe turned and walked toward the elevators. Phones tracked her every step. The woman who had been mistaken for a nobody was, in fact, the name on the building. And nothing in that bank would ever be the same again. The silence in the elevator was suffocating. As the sleek chrome doors slid shut, for people stood in stiff, uncertain positions, Dr. Elise Monroe, perfectly composed, James Calloway, still catching his breath, Jillian Tran, clutching her tablet like a shield, and Carson Blake. former peacock of the lobby, now reduced to a ghostly figure staring at the floor tiles. The soft hum of the elevator blended with the subtle ding of each passing floor. 5th, 6th, 7th. James shifted nervously. Sweat dampened the back of his shirt despite the climate control. Dr. Monroe stood near the control panel, arms folded, her expression unreadable. She wasn't angry, not in the way they expected. She didn't need to shout. Her silence felt more lethal than any outburst could have been. Jillian avoided eye contact. She replayed everything, her hesitance, her silence, her failure to step in. Carson, on the other hand, gripped the brushed metal railing, his knuckles white. Floor 14. James cleared his throat. Dr. Monroe, I want to personally assure you, what happened downstairs doesn't reflect Regency Capital's values. This was a lapse. A lapse. Elise's voice was soft, almost curious. Would you like to define that? James faltered. Well, I mean, one individual's misjudgment. It wasn't one individual, she said. The moment I walked in, 3 people watched me and said nothing. That's not a lapse. That's systemic. Floor 18. Carson finally spoke. Dr. Monroe, if you just identified yourself, I wouldn't have. Would it have mattered, Mr. Blake? Elise turned to him slowly. If I told you I had an account, if I handed you a business card, would you have believed me? Or would you have called for backup faster? Carson opened his mouth to answer, but nothing came out. I gave you a chance, she continued. I remained calm. I said I was here for routine business. And your response was to humiliate me. Loudly. Publicly. Floor 22. Jillian spoke up, her voice quiet but clear. Dr. Monroe, I didn't know who you were, but I did think something felt wrong. I should have said something. Elise glanced at her, her expression softening just slightly. Then learn from it, Ms. Tran. Silence is complicity. When you choose safety over justice, you've still made a choice. Ding. 26th floor. James looked between them. We'll review every policy. There will be mandatory training. And Carson, Mr. Blake, will be held accountable. But I want you to know, Dr. Monroe, we take this seriously. Do you? She asked without looking at him. Or do you take it seriously because it's been live-streamed to 12,000 people and the media is circling? The elevator was silent again. Floor 30. Carson finally gathered the courage to speak. Dr. Monroe, I swear. I didn't mean to disrespect you. If I'd known. But that's the point, she cut in. Respect shouldn't be conditional. It shouldn't require a name tag, a title, or a Centurion card. Floor 35. James ran a hand down his face. We'll issue a public statement, he said, almost to himself. Clarify everything. Apologize on behalf of the institution. That's a start, Elise replied. But words without action are noise. Floor 40. Jillian checked her tablet. Social media metrics were spiking. A tweet from Renee Wallace had already gone viral. Man tries to kick black woman out of a bank. Turns out she owns the bank. Let that sink in. Web traffic to Regency Capital's website had surged by 340% in the last 15 minutes. Dr. Monroe, Carson said again, voice cracking slightly. I really am sorry. I was just following protocol. Protocol doesn't say to escalate against someone for being black in a blazer, she replied. Protocol didn't put that condescension in your voice. You did. Floor 43. Jillian watched Elise in awe. She wasn't angry. She was surgical. Every word carved truth into the air, clean and irrefutable. James finally asked the question he was dreading. How would you like to proceed? Elise exhaled slowly. We're going to the boardroom. We'll begin with the facts. Then I'll explain what happens next. Ding. 47th floor. The elevator doors slid open. Light poured in from the executive level, floor-to-ceiling windows, modern artwork, polished mahogany furniture. At the far end, a glass-walled conference room overlooked the skyline. Inside, a dozen board members sat around a long table, reviewing quarterly projections. The 3 walked out together, Elise in front, followed by James and Jillian. Carson hesitated, then stumbled after them like a man walking towards sentencing. Inside the boardroom, conversations paused as they entered. Eyes turned. Confusion rippled through the room. Then recognition. Board Chairman Robert Ellsworth, a silver-haired veteran of the industry, stood up slowly. Dr. Monroe? Elise nodded once. Good afternoon. We have an emergency to discuss. James swallowed hard. Code 7, he said aloud. The room went silent. Code 7 was reserved for high-risk legal or reputational threats requiring immediate board action. What happened? Ellsworth asked, alarmed. Elise stepped forward. I was profiled, dismissed, and nearly removed from a building I own. Gasps echoed through the room. Elise placed her briefcase on the table, pulled out a sleek tablet, and connected it to the main screen. The lobby footage, Renee's live stream, clips from customer phones, all playing in sequence. Then the sound of Carson's voice, amplified for everyone to hear. People like you need to understand your place. It was deafening. One board member, Monica Chen, covered her mouth in horror. Another whispered, "Oh my God." Ellsworth sat back down, stunned. How many people saw this? Over 50,000 live, Elise said. It's still climbing. Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. News sites are already embedding the footage. And the woman in the footage, another board member began, voice cracking. That's really you? Elise nodded. Yes. And that moment wasn't an exception. It was a reflection. The room was still. Everyone understood. This wasn't just a PR crisis. It was a cultural indictment. Carson stood. Then, slowly, heads began to nod. Carson finally broke. I'll resign, he whispered. Effective immediately. Elise didn't respond. Not yet. Her eyes swept the boardroom, and then she said, I'm not here to destroy careers. I'm here to make sure this never happens again. The temperature in the boardroom dropped, not from the air conditioning, but from the weight of what had just been witnessed. 12 of the bank's most senior executives now sat facing not just their founder and majority shareholder, but the undeniable truth that had unfolded in high definition, live-streamed, and immortalized online. Dr. Elise Monroe stood at the head of the table. She didn't need to raise her voice. Her presence alone commanded the room. Before we continue, she said, tapping her tablet, I want you all to understand the scale of what's already happened. The conference screen shifted to display real-time metrics. Graphs surged upward. Views across platforms, 92,000 and rising. Hashtag banking while black is trending nationwide. Regency Capital Bank is trending regionally. We've already been mentioned by 3 local news affiliates and 1 national outlet. She looked around the table. This is no longer a branch-level incident. It's a corporate identity crisis. Jillian Tran shifted uncomfortably in her chair. Carson Blake, who had remained standing near the side wall, visibly sagged as if the numbers physically crushed him. No one offered him a seat. Ellsworth steepled his fingers. Dr. Monroe, what you experienced, it's unacceptable. We're prepared to issue a statement immediately. I'm not interested in statements, Elise replied. Not unless they accompany structural change. She tapped her tablet again. The next slide read, The Monroe Protocol, a framework for bias prevention and institutional integrity. Some board members exchanged glances. The tone had shifted again. Elise wasn't just responding to injustice. She was laying the blueprint for revolution. This isn't about one manager. It's not even about one incident. It's about creating a system that refuses to tolerate bias, overt or covert. She advanced to the next slide, policy pillars. Mandatory bias and anti-discrimination training for all customer-facing staff. Quarterly branch audits for diversity metrics and incident handling. Anonymous reporting systems to flag internal misconduct before it escalates. Real-time AI-driven bias detection tools to analyze customer interactions. Public accountability metrics released quarterly. One board member, Richard Faulkner, head of compliance, cleared his throat. Dr. Monroe, those measures are extensive. Costly, even. Do we know if the return on investment? Return on investment? Elise interrupted, turning to him. You're concerned about margins. I'm concerned about moral collapse. Faulkner flinched, but Elise's tone didn't rise. She let the weight of her words speak for themselves. Our quarterly revenue is $846 million, she continued. Initial implementation of the Monroe Protocol is projected at $4.7 million. Annual maintenance, $2.1 million. That's less than 1% of income, far less than the cost of one major lawsuit or a 20% customer loss due to public backlash. James Calloway finally spoke, voice steadier now. I've reviewed the proposals. The numbers are solid. And more importantly, the risk of not doing this is far higher. Ellsworth gave a slow nod. Dr. Monroe, what do you need from this board? Unanimous approval. Full funding. Implementation within 30 days. And a public-facing press conference tomorrow morning to announce Regency Capital's new position as an industry leader in ethical banking. Silence fell again, but it wasn't resistance. It was the stillness of a room realizing that history was unfolding in front of them. Board member Marisol Vega, head of community outreach, raised her hand. You have my full support. One by one, the others followed. Unanimous. Elise didn't smile. Not yet. She tapped her tablet one last time. The screen showed one name. Carson Blake. Termination recommendation. Carson lifted his head slightly, his face pale. Mr. Blake, she said, turning to him. You have two choices. Immediate resignation with standard severance. Or termination for cause, no severance, no reference, and a permanent mark on your industry record. Carson's voice cracked. I'll resign. Elise gave a single nod. Effective immediately. He lowered his head and walked quietly toward the door. For the first time since he was hired, no one looked at him with respect. Just relief that he was gone. Jillian rose next. Dr. Monroe, I want to apologize again. I froze. I didn't act. Elise turned to her. You were quiet, she said. But you weren't cruel. That matters. You're not being removed. But you will undergo extended bias training and a 6-month probationary review. Jillian's eyes welled with unexpected gratitude. Yes, Dr. Monroe. Thank you. Elise looked around the room. The faces staring back were no longer skeptical. They were reverent and alert. Let this be clear, she said. This isn't about one bad actor. This is about a system we either fix or inherit with all its rot intact. She gathered her briefcase. Tomorrow, we lead the industry. Today, we clean our house. As she left the boardroom, James Calloway walked beside her. You turned a disaster into a doctrine, he said. No, Elise replied. I turned silence into something useful. Wednesday, 10 a.m. The Regency Capital Bank downtown headquarters had never seen a media crowd like this. Tripod legs stretched across the pavement, local and national news vans lined the block, and reporters jostled for position on the steps. Cameramen wiped sweat from their brows as live streams booted up. By 9:45, hashtags like hashtag Monroe Protocol, hashtag Banking While Black, and hashtag Respect Is Policy had already trended for 12 straight hours. Inside, a podium stood at the front of the bank's central atrium. A new banner hung across the marble wall behind it. Regency Capital, Building Equity. Starting within. Dr. Elise Monroe stood off to the side, in a dark green blazer and slacks, no jewelry beyond her gold wedding band and Cartier watch. Her posture was as straight as ever, her gaze calm, measured. She had faced hostile markets, boardroom betrayals, and once a Senate Finance Committee. But this was different. This wasn't about profits. This was about proving something fundamental, that leadership meant taking responsibility for the systems you built, even when they failed you. James Calloway approached her quietly. You ready for this? I was born ready, Elise said. They just didn't know it. At 10:02 a.m., Elise stepped to the podium. Cameras flashed. Microphones angled upward. The hum of whispers fell into sharp silence. Good morning, she began. My name is Dr. Elise Monroe. I am the founder, CEO, and majority shareholder of Regency Capital Bank. Yesterday, I walked into one of my own branches and was treated, publicly and on record, as if I didn't belong there. The air in the room thickened. I was questioned, dismissed, and threatened with removal. Not because I was disruptive, not because I raised my voice, but because I am a black woman in a professional suit who didn't meet someone else's expectations of power. Her words struck like a gavel. Not angry, just undeniable. I am not here to shame individuals. I am here to fix systems. What happened to me is not unique. It happens in banks, schools, hospitals, offices, every day, to people without cameras, without social media, and without a title to fight back with. She paused, letting the weight settle. That ends today. Regency Capital is implementing a comprehensive internal reform package called the Monroe Protocol, designed to prevent, detect, and respond to bias in every branch, at every level. She outlined the measures. Bias training for all employees, including executives. Quarterly reporting on diversity and customer service metrics. AI-driven monitoring tools to flag problematic patterns in staff-customer interactions. Whistleblower protections and an anonymous reporting portal. And most importantly, she said, this isn't a PR stunt. This is policy. Hands flew up. Journalists shouted for attention. A voice from the back. Dr. Monroe, are you pursuing legal action? No, Elise said. This isn't about lawsuits. It's about legacy. Another voice. Was the employee involved fired? He resigned yesterday, she replied. His departure was appropriate. But this isn't about punishing one man. It's about preventing the next. A third voice. What would you say to people who think you're making this about race? I'm not making this about race, she said, unwavering. They did. The crowd fell still again. Then came the shift. Applause. It started small, from a group of local business owners in the back, but spread quickly until the marble atrium echoed with it. Cameras caught it all. Elise didn't flinch. She didn't smile. Not yet. Later that afternoon, news anchors across the country replayed clips from the conference. Soundbites dominated headlines. Bank CEO mistaken for trespasser implements national reform. Elise Monroe turns viral moment into industry revolution. Hashtag Monroe Protocol. The future of banking begins with accountability. The video of Carson Blake standing frozen as Elise revealed her identity reached over 2 million views by sunset. Internet detectives unearthed his old college interviews, his LinkedIn page, and within hours, memes flooded Twitter. When you realize the woman you just tried to kick out owns your paycheck. Plot twist. She signs your severance. But Elise didn't respond. She stayed off social media, focused entirely on rollout logistics. Jillian Tran, now working directly under James, coordinated the branch-level implementation plans. She'd thrown herself into the work, determined to atone with action. Meanwhile, Renee Wallace, whose live stream had triggered the viral spark, was invited to appear on Good Morning America. Sitting in a soft gray armchair, she recalled, I just turned on my camera because something didn't feel right. I didn't know she was the CEO. I just knew she didn't deserve that treatment. And look, now it's policy. Real change. By the end of the week, Regency Capital's customer satisfaction scores spiked. New accounts surged, particularly from Black-owned businesses, immigrant entrepreneurs, and millennial professionals who had previously distrusted banks. The story had ignited not just outrage, but hope. Other institutions took notice. 3 regional banks reached out to license the Monroe Protocol. 1 national credit union requested consulting support. The American Bankers Association invited Elise to deliver the keynote address at its diversity summit. The press called her the reluctant revolutionary. But Elise knew better. She wasn't reluctant. She was deliberate. Back at headquarters, James Calloway stood beside Elise in her corner office, which overlooked the skyline. The mood was quieter now, but focused. We've avoided federal investigation, James said. And media sentiment is net positive. Good, Elise replied. Now let's focus on the next 90 days. Policy is easy. Culture is hard. He hesitated. Do you think we'll get real buy-in? From every branch. We'll get resistance, she said plainly. From the ones who think respect is optional. But those people will either evolve, she said, or they'll exit. A long pause followed. Then James asked the question he'd been avoiding. Do you think any of them would have listened to this message if you weren't the CEO? Elise turned to the window. Sunlight played across the glass of nearby towers. No, she said. That's the problem. But it's also the leverage. 30 days later, the marble floors of Regency Capital's downtown branch reflected more than just light. They reflected change. Digital monitors near the entrance now displayed a rotating slideshow. We respect all. Zero tolerance for discrimination. The Monroe Protocol is in effect. Multilingual posters lined the walls, written in English, Spanish, and Vietnamese. Beneath them, new customer service name badges bore a simple phrase printed in bold letters. Respect for all. The transformation was visual, tangible. But the real change, Elise knew, would happen in the less visible places, in the subtle hesitations, in the moments where bias used to slip through unchecked. And that's exactly where the resistance began. At a suburban branch in West Haven, an older branch manager named Tom Wilcox leaned back in his chair, staring at the training module blinking on his screen. Unconscious bias module, session 2 of 6. Estimated time, 45 minutes. Tom scoffed. I've been serving customers since before this girl was even born, he muttered. And now she's going to tell me how to treat people? His assistant, Megan Park, younger and more forward-thinking, glanced over. It's not about her age, Tom. It's about accountability. Tom clicked the screen off. It's about optics. She's covering the bank's backside. That's all. But Megan wasn't convinced. Neither were the growing number of employees who had started to see the protocol not as a burden, but as a blueprint. At headquarters, Elise reviewed the latest compliance reports with Gillian Tran, who had stepped into her role as Director of Ethical Culture with fierce commitment. 78% of branches completed their second training module on time, Gillian reported. 12% delayed. 10% flagged for resistance, usually the same few managers. Elise studied the map. Red dots blinked in patterns. Resistance wasn't random, it was generational, hierarchical, cultural. We need peer leaders in those branches, Elise said. People who buy into this not because they have to, but because they believe it's right. Gillian nodded. I've started identifying them. What about incident reporting? Elise asked. Bias reports are down 53%, Gillian said. Customer satisfaction is up across all metro branches. But, I've seen discrimination, he said simply. I've seen it happen when people thought no one noticed. The Monroe Protocol doesn't just react, it prevents. And that's why it works. One trainee raised her hand. What do we do if a supervisor's the problem? Rod's answer was firm. You report it. The system protects you. And if it doesn't, Dr. Monroe will. In the boardroom, quarterly reports stunned even the most skeptical directors. Customer retention had jumped 14%. Minority-owned business accounts had increased 31%. Complaint resolution time dropped by nearly half. And internal surveys showed a 39% increase in employee confidence in handling difficult customer situations. I can't believe I'm saying this, said Richard Faulkner, the board member who once questioned the cost. But the Monroe Protocol is outperforming every initiative we've launched in the last decade. Chairman Robert Ellsworth leaned back, the ghost of a smile on his usually stern face. That's because it's more than policy. It's culture. Elise's national profile was rising fast. She'd been invited to speak at 3 financial ethics conferences. Forbes published a feature titled, The Woman Who Rewired a Bank from the Inside Out. CNN Business called her the new face of corporate reform. Still, Elise kept her focus local. Quiet. Grounded. Every Friday, she walked the floor of a different branch, no press, no entourage. Just a clipboard and sharp eyes. At a branch in Northview, she sat with a teller named Tarek Evans, who told her, before the protocol, I used to just nod and smile when someone treated me sideways. Now, I've got a way to push back, without losing my job. At another branch, a Haitian immigrant named Madame Leroux held Elise's hand with teary eyes. You remind me of my daughter, she whispered. She wanted to work in finance, but said it wasn't for people like us. Now she sees your face on the cover of magazines. But not everyone was happy. Tom Wilcox, the West Haven manager, had started organizing internal pushback. Cloaked in the language of tradition and efficiency, he emailed fellow holdouts about overreach, overregulation, and woke politics infecting sound banking. Elise got a copy forwarded to her by Megan. She didn't react emotionally. Instead, she scheduled a visit. Monday morning, 9 a.m. West Haven branch. Elise arrived without warning. She walked in wearing a simple gray pantsuit, no security, no announcement. Tom didn't recognize her, at first. Then he froze. Elise. I mean, Dr. Monroe. I didn't expect. You didn't, she said. That's been a recurring theme. She asked for a seat in his office. Closed the door gently behind her. For 23 minutes, she spoke. Not in anger. Not with threats. But with facts. Case studies. Legal risks. Human costs. She spoke of ethics, equity, and evolution. Tom tried to counter. But our numbers are good. And they could be better, she replied, without bias holding them back. By the time she left, Tom didn't offer excuses. He offered to re-enroll in the training he had skipped. That night, Megan Park emailed Gillian. Whatever she said in that office worked. Wilcox just asked me for a copy of the AI bias module. Voluntarily. The ripple was now a wave. Within 6 weeks, 5 other financial institutions had publicly adopted versions of the Monroe Protocol. 2 Fortune 500 companies requested Elise's input on internal DI audits. And the Federal Banking Review Committee requested a private consultation. 1 year ago, she had been mistaken for an intruder in her own bank. Now, she was being asked to help reshape the national standard. At home, late one evening, Elise stood by her living room window, watching the city lights stretch out like a constellation of small promises. Her husband, Malcolm, brought her tea and stood beside her. You're changing the industry, he said. She didn't respond right away. I'm just holding it accountable, she whispered. And proving something. He smiled. What? That respect, she said, turning to him, isn't something we should have to earn. It should come standard. 4 months after that first confrontation in the downtown branch lobby, Dr. Elise Monroe stood before the grand rotunda of the Federal Reserve's Community Development Council in Washington, D.C. The chamber was built to intimidate. Marble columns, ornate ceilings, mahogany desks arranged in a semicircle around a single microphone. Elise wore a black sheath dress with long sleeves, hair pinned back, no frills, only presence. Behind her, a large screen displayed the title of her presentation. From Policy to Principle, Restructuring Trust in American Banking. She didn't look at her notes. She didn't need to. When people ask me what started the Monroe Protocol, she began, they expect a mission statement. What they don't expect is a memory. She paused. A memory of standing in my own bank lobby and being told I didn't belong. Of being asked to leave, not because I was loud, not because I was wrong, but because I didn't look like someone who should be there. The room was still. That moment was not rare. What was rare was that it happened to someone with power. And that's the problem. Most people don't get that second chance, that public correction, that redemption arc. They just get erased. Elise moved to the next slide, a side-by-side chart. On one side, customer complaints, discrimination incidents, branch turnover. On the other side, post-Monroe Protocol, all sharply reduced. She continued, we didn't fix culture with PR. We changed systems. We trained people, yes, but we also put algorithms to work. We installed alerts. We reviewed footage. We audited decisions. Because trust isn't built on sentiment. It's built on accountability. Representatives from major banks scribbled notes. Regulators leaned forward. One board member murmured, this should have happened 20 years ago. By the end of her address, Elise hadn't just earned applause, she earned a unanimous vote from the advisory panel to recommend the Monroe Protocol as a national compliance model for all federally regulated financial institutions. It would begin as a guideline, but Elise already knew it would become the standard. Back at Regency Capital headquarters, the transformation was in full bloom. The quarterly performance report landed on Chairman Ellsworth's desk with numbers no one could have predicted. Customer acquisition up 28%. Account retention up 19%. Minority business lending up 42%. Staff turnover down 40%. Social approval ratings at record highs. Ellsworth reviewed the charts in silence, then finally looked up and said to James Calloway, you know, I used to think diversity was about optics. Now I know it's about optimization. James nodded. It's also about obligation. In the corner of the office, a newly installed quote had been framed on the wall. It was from Elise's press conference. Respect shouldn't be conditional. It should come standard. Across the country, the Monroe Protocol spread like wildfire, but not because it was mandated. Because it worked. 17 banks adopted it within the first 6 months. 5 credit unions rewrote their internal training to match its structure. The American Banking Association restructured their ethics certification to include it. And beyond banking, it began to ripple into new sectors, real estate, hospitality, healthcare. Wherever power had once cloaked prejudice, Elise's model began unmasking it. But for Elise, the most meaningful moment came quietly. It happened on a rainy Thursday morning, back at the same branch where everything began. The downtown location now hosted an annual Equity Day, celebrating inclusive finance and small business innovation. The lobby had changed, bright colors, community art, warm music playing softly in the background. Elise stepped in without fanfare. She wasn't there to speak. She was there to watch. A young teller named Malik Harper, only 19, was helping an elderly Hispanic man fill out forms for a new account. The man didn't speak much English. Malik didn't speak Spanish. But he didn't sigh. He didn't roll his eyes. He smiled, used the bank's multilingual support app, and walked the man through the process step by step. Kindness, clarity, patience. Just as Elise turned to leave, Malik saw her. He paused, then smiled nervously. Dr. Monroe? She smiled. You're doing good work. He lit up. Thank you, ma'am. I'm trying to follow the protocol. You're not just following it, she said. You're embodying it. In the weeks that followed, Elise's legacy became institutionalized. The Monroe Protocol was now a national reference standard, cited in legal defenses, regulatory handbooks, and university case studies. Harvard Business School published a paper titled Systemic Reform Through Silent Authority, the Monroe Method. The NAACP, Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, and Asian American Financial Alliance all publicly endorsed Regency Capital as the national model for ethical banking. Recruitment tripled. Employee satisfaction hit a record 94%. Elise Monroe was named Business Leader of the Year by Fortune and featured on the cover of Time. Yet, she never called it a personal victory. At the next company-wide meeting, she addressed the staff on video call from her home office. Behind her, shelves lined with books, family photos, and the now iconic framed still from that viral moment, when she stood in the center of the lobby surrounded by guards, calm as a hurricane's eye. "I'm not proud of what happened that day," she said. "I'm proud of what we did with it." A year later, Regency Capital's downtown branch hosted its second annual Equity Day. This time, the atrium was packed. Clients, employees, community leaders, startup founders funded by the Monroe-backed Loan Initiative. Even students from a local high school financial literacy program stood wide-eyed in the lobby. Elise took the stage briefly, not for a speech, but for a story. A young woman once walked into her own bank and was told she didn't belong. She didn't yell. She didn't threaten. She whispered 5 words and changed everything. She paused. That woman was me. And those 5 words were, "You're going to regret this." Laughter, applause, but also reflection. Because they all knew that moment was real. That silence can roar. That dignity can disrupt. And that sometimes the most powerful revolution doesn't come in anger, but in quiet, relentless clarity. Outside the bank, the world went on. Taxis passed, phones buzzed, traffic lights blinked. But inside, something permanent had taken root. Not just new policies, not just new posters, but a new culture, etched into the bones of the institution, no longer optional. Elise Monroe didn't just reform a bank. She redefined what it meant to belong in one. 6 weeks after Equity Day, a letter arrived at Elise Monroe's office. It was handwritten, on simple white paper. The return address listed a small town in Georgia. Inside was a note that began, "Dear Dr. Monroe, I watched your press conference with my daughter. She's 12, and for the first time, she said she wants to be a CEO. She asked me, 'Do you think someone like me could do that?' I told her, 'Now I know she can.' There was no name, no phone number, just a signature. A father who needed you to win." Elise folded the letter gently and slid it into a drawer that already held dozens like it. From strangers, from parents, from bank employees in rural counties, from retirees who said they'd never trusted a financial institution until they saw someone who looked like them, leading it with integrity. The stories weren't data, but they were evidence. At Regency Capital, the impact of the Monroe Protocol had become foundational. It wasn't a reform initiative anymore. It was a cultural identity. Rod Martinez now traveled the country as a keynote speaker for security leadership programs. He wasn't a man of speeches, but his quiet credibility made him unforgettable. "The old job was just guarding doors," he said to a packed conference in Chicago. "Now we guard dignity." Jillian Tran, once a hesitant assistant manager, had become chief culture officer, a title Elise invented, but one that had quickly been copied by a dozen other companies. Her journey from bystander to advocate was part of every new hire orientation. The day Dr. Monroe walked into the bank, she told each new class of employees, "I thought I was protecting the system by saying nothing. I was wrong. The system was broken. Silence is not neutral, it's permission." Regency Capital's competitors were no longer competing. They were studying. Banks across the country requested protocol implementation kits. Consulting branches were launched. Elise's team traveled to Miami, Minneapolis, Denver, New Orleans. Not to advertise, but to listen. She insisted on it. "Systems fail when leadership stops listening," she said during one of her internal roundtables. "Policies don't walk into the lobby. People do." In every branch she visited, someone always pulled her aside. Sometimes a teller, sometimes a janitor, sometimes a regional director. They always said the same thing. "I stayed because of you. I applied because of you. I speak up now because of you." And Elise always said the same thing back. "No, you stayed because of who you are. I just reminded you." National media had long since elevated her. Time, Forbes, The Wall Street Journal, The Economist, even international coverage, El País, The Guardian, Nikkei Asia. She was called the quiet architect of reform. The woman who changed banking without breaking it. The CEO who answered disrespect with design. But none of it impressed her as much as what came next. One evening, her assistant knocked gently. "Dr. Monroe, there's a guest downstairs. She doesn't have an appointment, but she said she used to work here." She brought a violin. Elise blinked. "A violin?" She said her name is Yvonne Mercer. It took Elise a moment. Yvonne Mercer, the janitor, the woman who'd been let go a year before the protocol, who used to mop the floors in silence, who once hummed softly to herself at the end of every shift. "She's waiting in the lobby," her assistant said. Elise rose. Downstairs, Yvonne stood in the same marble lobby Elise had once been humiliated in. But now, it looked different. Felt different. Gone were the sterile barriers and security-heavy tone. Instead, the space pulsed with warmth. Banners from the Diversity Loan Fund, success stories displayed on screens, brochures for community investment programs. Yvonne clutched her violin case. "Elise," she said softly, "I saw you on TV. I don't have an account here anymore, but I had to come back." Elise approached slowly. "Yvonne, you don't need an account to walk into a space you helped build." Yvonne smiled. "Do you remember? You once told me, a quiet presence can still leave a loud legacy. I didn't understand that until I saw what you did here." She opened the case, took out her violin, and began to play. The melody, soft, soulful, mournful, curled through the lobby. Employees stopped. Customers turned. Even the security guard near the door leaned forward as the music lifted into something fuller, braver. A solo, but also a signal. A signal that something had been reclaimed. Not just a lobby, not just a system, but a sense of belonging for every person who had ever been told they didn't. Later that night, Elise sat alone at her desk, watching the video someone had taken of Yvonne's impromptu performance. It was already going viral, not because of fame, but because it felt like something rare. A reversal with grace. A victory with humility. She watched the comments scroll. She played like she owned the space. This is what it looks like when justice becomes culture. I cried. My mom was a cleaner. She never got this moment. We need this in every industry. The Monroe Protocol should be taught in school. Elise closed her laptop. Outside, the city lights blinked like applause. She didn't need the spotlight, because the work wasn't about her. It was about the girl who just got hired in Omaha, the immigrant father in Newark opening his first account, the janitor who played her violin with pride in a room that once turned her invisible. Sometimes, leadership isn't loud. Sometimes, revolution doesn't look like fire. Sometimes, it wears a blazer, whispers 5 words, and rewrites everything. 1 year to the day since the incident that began it all, Dr. Elise Monroe stood once again in the marble lobby of Regency Capital's flagship branch. But today was not for correction. Today was for celebration. Sunlight poured through the glass facade, catching the edges of gold-accented signage above the front entrance. Regency Capital, home of the Monroe Protocol. Inside, the atrium buzzed, not with tension, but with music, conversation, and a palpable sense of pride. Employees wore ribbons in silver and blue, the bank's original colors, now redefined with deeper meaning. Silver for resilience, blue for clarity. Elise didn't stand on stage. She didn't hold a microphone. She didn't need to. She moved quietly through the crowd, shaking hands, exchanging hugs, listening to laughter. In one corner, a group of young entrepreneurs, recipients of the equity loan fund she had launched, shared business cards and strategy over mocktails. In another, a team of branch managers posed beneath a banner reading, 1 year, 0 complaints, 100% accountability. Rod Martinez, now the institution's director of security ethics, was introducing a new digital reporting kiosk. Customers could rate their interaction anonymously, and results would be fed in real time to a national dashboard. Elise watched it all with quiet satisfaction. Jillian Tran approached, holding a folder. "We finalized the partnership with the city's Small Business Council," she said, eyes glowing. "They're naming you as their Equity Ambassador of the Year." Elise raised an eyebrow. "Is there a plaque?" Jillian grinned. "There's a mural." Elise sighed playfully. "Do I get to veto my face?" "No, it's already painted." They laughed together, an ease between them that had been earned, not given. Across the lobby, Renee Wallace stood with a press badge around her neck, now a full-time journalist and media consultant for corporate equity initiatives. She'd turned her viral moment into a movement of her own, building the Justice Watch Network, a platform dedicated to documenting real-time discrimination and corporate responses. When she caught Elise's eye, she mouthed, "Thank you." Elise nodded. Then came the moment that silenced the room. A bell rang, not a bank chime, but an old bronze bell retrieved from the institution's first branch, restored and installed just for today. It rang once at exactly 2:47 p.m., the time she had first walked into the branch 1 year ago. All activity stopped. Customers stood. Employees straightened. A video began to play on the central screen. Not the viral video. Something new. Footage from throughout the year. Elise walking quietly through rural branches. A former doubter, Tom Wilcox, leading a team huddle under the banner, "Respect starts here." A Vietnamese teller translating a loan form for an elderly customer. A black teenager shaking hands with the manager who'd helped him open his first business account. Yvonne Mercer's violin solo. At the end, a message faded onto the screen. This is what happens when dignity leads. This is what it looks like when justice becomes infrastructure. This is what legacy feels like. Applause filled the space, not roaring, but real. Elise remained still, not because she was overwhelmed, but because she understood what few people ever truly do. That power is not in being recognized. It's in what you do when no one thought to recognize you in the first place. 3 months later, Elise stepped down as CEO. She announced her retirement not with a press conference, but in a handwritten letter sent to every employee. "I never intended to lead forever. Leadership is not possession, it's stewardship. We build the system, then we pass it on. I leave not because the work is finished, but because you've proven it will continue without me." She named Gillian Tran as her successor. It was the loudest statement she ever made, spoken entirely without words. Regency Capital continued to flourish. The Monroe Protocol was now embedded in 43 financial institutions nationwide. 3 Fortune 500 companies had adopted its model. The Department of Commerce issued a formal recommendation for national adoption, and the protocol was being studied in graduate programs from Stanford to Howard. But Elise didn't return to boardrooms. She taught. At Howard. At Harvard. At small town halls and places where bankers had never been trained in anything but spreadsheets. Her most requested seminar was always the same: how to lead when they don't see you coming. And she always began it with the same question: what would you do if the world refused to recognize your power? Would you yell? Would you fight? Or would you build something they couldn't ignore? She would pause, then smile. Good. Because that's how you change it. In the final years of her career, Elise turned her focus to global financial inclusion. She traveled to villages in Ghana, microlending hubs in Vietnam, and indigenous-led banking programs in Montana. Everywhere she went, someone had heard of the Monroe Protocol. Not because of social media, because of impact, because of systematic dignity, because somewhere along the line, the world realized the most powerful response to being underestimated isn't outrage. It's building something that leaves no room for doubt. And sometimes, the best revenge is watching a broken system reform itself, not to apologize, but because you showed it how to be better. 10 years later, a young intern walks into Regency Capital's flagship branch. She's nervous. Her hair is tied back tightly, shoes scuffed from the walkover. She clutches a folder. She's never been in a bank this big. The front desk receptionist, wearing a silver and blue badge that reads "Respect for All," greets her warmly. "You're here for the mentorship session?" he asks. She nods. "Follow me," he says. "We're meeting in the Monroe Room." She pauses. "The what?" He smiles. "The Monroe Room. Named after the founder. It used to be the main lobby. A long time ago, someone told her she didn't belong here. Now the whole place belongs to her story." The intern nods, heart pounding. As she walks down the polished hall, she doesn't notice the plaque above the door, but someday, she will. It reads, "Power does not raise its voice. It raises the standard." Dr. Elise Monroe. Dr. Elise Monroe walked into her own bank and was told she didn't belong. She didn't shout. She didn't threaten. She built a system so strong it changed the industry. From humiliation to global reform, from one viral moment to a national protocol, her story proves this. True power doesn't come from being seen. It comes from building something that cannot be ignored. If you've ever been underestimated, dismissed, or told you don't belong, let this be your reminder. You don't need to shout to be powerful. You just need to keep building. Share this story with